Hello and welcome back to COG 376. Um, this lecture is going to be about the model of language called SHRDLU. Yes, that's how you pronounce it, SHRDLU, and how it's built. So we've been focusing really hard on the weeds, a lot of programming techniques, low-level details about chopping up text, all this kind of good stuff. And I wanted to zoom back out a bit and talk about natural language modeling more broadly and some of the history of how we've advanced in terms of our ability to capture natural language. So, natural language, we've come at this from a couple of different levels, right? At the high, sort of, for those of you familiar with the levels of Mars levels, computational idea, high-level idea of, hey, this is our natural human way of communicating, right? We use language. We know it's composed of words, at least, and concepts and something semantics happens, and then we have meaning from symbols. Cool. That's the high-level description. We've also dug down at sort of a lower-level description of like, okay, how might that work? Chopping up strings of characters which are split into units of meaning and blah, blah, all these things we've learned with Python, right? So, there's lots of ways to build models that will highlight one little piece of the overall puzzle of all of this, right? So natural language is something that you just do fluently and you're really freaking good at it. I can promise you that. You are able to hear all these words I'm saying and also all the other things that aren't quite words, right? You hear me stutter. You hear me pause. I might leave a sentence unfinished and then interrupt myself, right? And you're still able to make sense of it. You're doing a lot of work that you just aren't even really aware of. You're just hearing this and think, oh, that's fine. But there is a lot of machinery churning away inside of you. So anyway, the things that we're able to really focus on, we have some understanding. Syntax seems like a pretty stable thing to model, right? There are some pretty solid rules on how we put sentences together. It doesn't hit every possible case. Like I said, there are lots of ways for us to take pretty well ungrammatical information and still construct meaning out of it. But it's one piece, right? One piece of the puzzle. There's also ways of doing semantic relatedness, which again we'll touch on in the future, but it can be tricky to quantify like how connected are two terms. What does that even really mean? How are they related to one another? But it can be done. And then also we'll get things that we'll talk about, probability-based models of language, right? So what are the insights we can gain from and the outputs we can create using a database of how often words occur together in language. Anyway, the point of this is these are each individual pieces of a larger puzzle of how language works in nature, right? In you. You are nature as well, right? And it works. So let's look at an example. An example of a syntax model, right? So let's take this very long sentence. A burlap sack of potatoes with mealy skins fell on the professor of linguistics with terrible taste in t-shirts from the 12th story last Tuesday. Okay, there's a lot of things in there, modifying other things. But I think we've pieced it together, right? You sort of get what fell on who. You get kind of when it happened. You get how high up the thing fell from. And that's because somewhere in your brain guts, you were doing something like this. Again, it is not a perfectly accurate way of characterizing, the way that we do syntactic parsing in the brain per se. But this is still a model of how you come up with some kind of syntactical relevance from the sentence, right? Things are grouped properly, things that are connected together. So last Tuesday is one noun phrase. From the 12th story is a prepositional phrase, and which seems, if you've broken it out properly, you can then say, oh, I know which thing that's pointing to. It's not, the teacher is not from the 12th story. It's the potatoes, right? That's a lot. And this is just to show you that even one fairly it's a single sentence, right? It's a long sentence with some weird stuff going on in it, but a single sentence, that's a lot of parsing going on. A lot of possible categories, a lot of possible matches for what parts of speech different things fit into, right? On the other end, we have semantics. So which concepts are related, by how much, what's the closest related word to, say, goat, right? Probably some things from the farm are going to be related, but some things from like airplanes, maybe not, right? So it's tricky to quantify semantic relatedness, but the fact is that a lot of concepts are related, they overlap, and they can be confused by each other. And we also need to kind of track how these concepts relate to the real world. What are their sort of ground semantics? What does it mean to say a river? Is it just the river at any given state? Is it more of a social construct of, oh, that's the place that we go to, we get our water for the day, right? So semantics also, there's a lot there, right? There's a wide world of overlapping, interconnected terms. One really cool bit of research you can go check out on your own is you go to this Gallant Lab website, and they've done a lot of work trying to locate what parts of the brain are active, a distributed network style parts of the brain. On the left here, you see sort of a flat map of the brain, so it's not a one-to-one thing, but it's a map of where different surface level cortical activity in the brain is occurring when certain semantic categories and objects and labels are brought up. So it's this ongoing effort to try to say, hey, where does the concept of table live in the brain, right? And the answer is very distributed, but you can play around in the site. It's very cool. And you can see, the foxes cause brains to light up more like this, whereas other animals might cause it to light up more like this, etc. It's not all general, but the point is that there's a lot of semantic information in the world, and we got a friggin' lot of words in our tool belt at any given time. Humans are good at words, and we know a bunch. I believe the average human knows about 1.3 million words without English speaker, more than you'd think. That's a lot of words to cram into your brain. So we're starting to see how modeling natural language in full could be a struggle, right? We've seen how to break up a single sentence and how to maybe map a handful of concepts together. But if you're trying to figure out how language all fits together, and in the process of modeling that language over, the course of the time it enters through your ears and exits through your mouth or whatever you're trying to do in response to the language, right? So a system like that would need to, at the very minimum, consider millions of terms and their roles in sentence construction all at once, resolve all sorts of ambiguities in the syntax and the semantics of the language. So, if there's lots of cases, we'll cover some in a minute, where a sentence won't really make sense right off the bat because the one word could mean several different things, or one referent could refer to two different things in the sentence, so sort of a syntactical ambiguity versus a semantic ambiguity. And finally, you'd have to come up with an understanding of what was that language trying to convey, and what actions do I want to take based on it, right? To highlight that further, so ambiguities, right? This is a key problem because they cause some pretty bad situations for something like a syntax parse that needs to be able to output a confirmed sentence structure, right? If I'm going to use the syntax of a sentence for anything else in my processing of language, it better have one shape, right? So let's look at this sentence. Bart watched a squirrel with binoculars. There are two ways to parse this sentence. Bart watched a squirrel with binoculars versus Bart watched a squirrel with binoculars. You know which thing is true here, right? If someone said this sentence to you, you wouldn't be baffled and say, "How did the squirrel get those binoculars?" You wouldn't, unless you were being a dingus. you would immediately know, hey, squirrels don't hold binoculars. But how did you know that? How did you use that information to decipher this ambiguity? Other ambiguous sentences you might run into. I went to the bank. What kind of bank? Are we talking about a money bank? Or are we talking about a beach, right? The banks of the river, right? Flying planes can be dangerous. Are we talking about the act of flying a plane? Or are we talking about the sorts of planes that are flying currently are dangerous? Like maybe don't stand in front of a flying plane. But also, maybe don't fly a plane unless you're trained, right? Call me an ambulance. Call one for you. This is a classic, stupid Groucho Marx style bit, but call one for you. Am I trying to call an ambulance so that you can get to the hospital and be safe? Or do you just want me to call you an ambulance? And one that we will revisit involving blocks, boxes, and pyramid shapes is put the blue pyramid on the block in the box. Okay. Where's the ambiguity here? Where is the blue pyramid to start is the question. If is the blue pyramid on the box, on the block, or is it on nothing and we're being told to put it on the block that is in the box? More on this later. So all this is meant to illustrate that there is a lot more to processing language than any one individual step. It's a complex process, and the problem space is huge. You have lots of semantics to filter through. You have tons of information available to you, and you have to resolve all of these possible errors. It's not just a strict nesting. It's not a single process. It's all got to be interconnected. So from the phonetics and the phonemes, the sounds, to the words and phrases, to the actual literal meaning, and then the contextually meaningful meaning, right? So it's all nestled together in this, interface from the lowest level structures to the full understanding and meaning in the world. And that has to do with complexity. So any one part of any of these forms of language modeling we've discussed, not all of them at length yet, but we will see them more. They're doable for a handful of examples pretty easily, right? But it becomes harder to fit them all together as you scale up the set of all words, right? All words that you're willing to include in your process. So as the number of all the ambiguities increases, for example, so does the computational power that would be required to sort through those ambiguities. So if your semantic space is something like this, which I guarantee is not even that much, right? This is all related concepts connecting to one another and being a sort of a network, right? This is also just an example that, don't look too deeply into the structures here. So if that's what you're working with, then your model is going to just going to chug. It's going to struggle a lot because it's going to be very difficult for it to sort through all the possible words, all the possibly closely related semantic things. It's a long process because for every single word, every token of language, you're probably going to have to consult a lot of this space. So how might you wrangle complexity when you are attempting to work to get a strong model of how language is processed? So again, this issue of scaling makes modeling language in a, quote, complete way super daunting. So what if we say instead, fine, I won't do all of language. I will just use a micro world. So what are micro worlds? You may have heard of them before in this COG line. The name implies small world, right? But what that really means is it has limited sets of several things in it, right? A limited set of possible actions that can be taken in the world, a limited set of objects that can exist, so types of objects, a limited set of the properties that those objects can have, and some defined set of interactions and relations between certain objects and actions. And the shorthand way to think of this is video games are microworlds, right? Your phone is creating a simulated program space with a visual world in it that for you to screw around in. There's only so many buttons you can click. You learn what things are things and which things aren't things, all that kind of stuff. So if you ever struggle with the concept of microworld, just think a video game that might be a little more boring than your favorite one, right? So what does this buy us for language processing, though? Microworlds exist to limit complexity, and in this case, they help with that in language, right? So in a microworld with only the concepts of dogs and cats, it doesn't need to bother thinking about the question that involves the word birds. Birds simply don't exist. That's a meaningless statement in a microworld that only involves dogs and cats. And this is a huge benefit for trying to make models that are a little bit more complex, right? Things that try to put together a full set of all the things we think a human might be able to do to process language without dealing with that explosion and complexity that you get with real-world language sets. So the key idea being, by limiting the problem space, we can attempt to do all of that problem space, right? So we are limiting the set of things we consider to be, quote, language, so that we can say, okay, I want to do all of this small set. So visually, breaking down from a huge set of all possible words to a handful of concepts that have different properties, right? So this is where SHRDLU is born. So Winograd in 1972, yeah, we're rolling through history. Terry Winograd developed a model of language called SHRDLU. So the goal of the model was SHRDLU should be able to parse almost any natural language sentence given to it, provided that that sentence only refers to things that are in the micro world that it lives in as well. To zoom that in a little bit. Pick up a big red block. SHRDLU does it and says, okay. Okay. What? So what is this world? What is SHRDLU doing? What is SHRDLU made of? What are we talking about? Let's look through each piece in turn. So SHRDLU's micro world is called Blocks World, and it is essentially what we just discussed. It is a micro world. It has only a handful of possible objects can exist, right? So there are pyramids, there are blocks, and there are boxes. That's it. It is only those three kinds of objects. There might be more of some of these other things than what we will cover, but properties. So objects can have things like height, width, and depth. They can have a color. They can have the held property, suggesting whether or not SHRDLU is currently holding this item, right? And the actions that can be issued for this world are things like find, so locate something, pick up a specific thing, or put down a specific thing. And then there are lots of interactions that help to guide some of this. So there's some simple naive physics things, like you can't stack a block on top of a pyramid. It won't stay there. That will cause an instability. That's not valid, right? That's one of the rules of the world. Also, objects must be able to fit inside of a box, right? You can't put a 500 width block inside of a 20 width box, right? So little things like that also just need to be encoded in the way that the world works. Other than that, that's it. Now this is a little bit of a tricky concept when you haven't run into it before. This is the world to this model. Just like you live in the real world that has Earth and outer space and stars everywhere and all that kind of stuff. In Blocks World, there's no stars, there's no Earth, there's just some blocks and some pyramids and some boxes. Okay. I hope that's impressed upon you how very limited this micro world is. So then what's the goal? What is SHRDLU actually doing, right? So let's describe it at a high level. SHRDLU is trying to converse with the user about the state of the blocks world, and sometimes it will take actions while doing so. Okay, so what do these conversations look like? SHRDLU can do a few different things. It can answer questions. So if you ask it, hey, which of these two blocks is taller, then it can do a comparison between the properties of those blocks and then say, that one is taller. It is able to say that back because it's a very structured thing. It's easy for it to produce that kind of language. It can carry out instructions like, okay, I'll pick up the block you told me to pick up. It can plan out more complex instructions. So like, first I'll pick up the pyramid and move it, then I'll do this. And it can do that, without having to be explicitly told, right? It'll recognize that, the block you want is under two other blocks. I guess I'm going to have to move those first, that kind of thing. And it even has some ability to incorporate new terms, but that's a little bit dicey. We won't focus on that. So here's another quick example of it. On the left-hand side, we have the starting state of SHRDLU, right? You see its fake little arm. It has a virtual arm in the world. And it is holding this red block, right? So now we give it this instruction: find a block which is taller than the one you are holding and put it in the box. Now, you might scratch your head slightly and say, wow, that's actually kind of sophisticated. It doesn't sound hard to a human. A lot of us are just looking at this from a human lens, but from the stance of sort of a linguistic process, there's a lot of different things going on here. There's sort of a couple of different referring points. So what does the one mean? What does it refer to near the end there? But you can also, again, at your human level, you can see, well, that makes sense. I'm holding this block. I'll use that as a point of reference to compare to the other blocks. All I see are two short green ones and one tall blue one. I will put my block down, I'll pick up that other block, and I'll put it in the box behind where the pyramid is, ostensibly, because I can't collide them. And then, ta-da, I've solved it. SHRDLU will say, okay, and it will be done. All right, so how does SHRDLU achieve this? So again, SHRDLU has a few things. It has a virtual arm to interact with the blocks world. It also has complete knowledge of the state of the blocks world, so it just knows where everything is. It doesn't have to try and parse the world from a specific angle. It doesn't have limited vision. It has omniscient understanding of the blocks world. So, but how exactly it achieves this is it uses a variety of internal systems that all take that user input and process it into actions and responses. So, what kinds of systems are we talking about here? SHRDLU has three kind of broad categories. It has syntax systems, so that helps it pick apart the sentences it reads and sort of figure out what exists, what's referring to what, that kind of thing. The semantic system, which helps to convert the received language into real objects and properties and actionable things, right? And then there's the integration systems, which will help kind of triangulate all this, figure out what's needed, pass information from one area to the virtual arm, all that kind of stuff. So they all interact and are connected to one another in various ways. So let's look at that. This is the general organization of SHRDLU. It's a lot of different subsystems. These are all, you can think of them as just processes, separate processes, separate little programs, right? Little scripts that are just waiting for information from each other, right? So they might all be on their own little loop and sending information around. They also might just be executed one at a time, but the point is that they are distinct from one another. And they are not one giant process. They are interconnected sets of smaller processes. So you have the input, which is what the user writes and gives as input. Things like grammar to help with the syntax, right? And those are both going to look at the dictionary to figure out, okay, which things are which parts of speech, that kind of stuff. Semantics also is going to interface with the dictionary to figure out, hey, which things are actions, which things are, what are we doing here? But it can also talk to things like blocks, which has the understanding of what the world is right now. Ultimately, you're going to need the planner and the mover to execute actions. And finally, something all here connected is going to spit out some kind of answer, right? So the most powerful insight here is that this is not thinking of language as a single monolithic process that is perfectly linear. It's thinking of it as an interconnected set of sub-processes that can all interact with each other. That's much more brain-like than the classic, straight up and down information processing approach. So the semantics system, for example, can interact with both the dictionary system and the block system to make sense of, known concepts from the dictionary, but also the state of the world from the blocks. So semantics might need to say, oh, crap, they are pointing at the block. Well, what can that possibly mean? Oh, there's only one block, so it must be that one. That kind of thing, right? The answer system, on the other hand, might need to know first of all, what the requested action meant. Like, was this an action that they wanted me to do? Was this a request? Or was it a question that I can just answer? It needs to know whether it was even possible to do it, so it can give that kind of information. And it needs to know if it succeeded when trying to do it, right? So all of that information is used by the answer subsystem to be able to spit back out something to the user, right? So again, hoping you see the sort of connected nature of all these different sub processes in SHRDLU to capture the idea that the information needs to go to multiple places sometimes. So we're going to watch a short video, just like with your eyes primed on how SHRDLU works. Let's have a look. Also, I don't think it has any audio, so I'm just going to go for it. Yeah. So what does the box contain? The blue pyramid and the blue block. So it's able to immediately answer questions that the user is inputting at the top. What is the pyramid supported by? Oh, the box, right? And although there's a couple of different boxes and pyramids, but the answer was true for both, right? I'm falling behind it a little bit just because I want to keep commenting. So is at least one of them narrower than the one I told you to pick up? Oof, that's a lot of past reference to things. So it does have a bit of memory as well. So yeah, you're watching it interact with the user. These are full sentences. Now, some of this stuff that SHRDLU is producing, they're just templates, right? Similar to what we might find in an ELIZA. But those templates work, right? I think some of our language is sort of templated, right? We know what the answer is when somebody asks you, hey, this is McDonald's, can I take your order? Like, you know what shape your answer should be in. You don't have to do magic creation on the spot. So it's pretty good. I've been talking over it a little bit, but you can see, well, now it's getting into the user is just chatting with it. Oh, I like the blue pyramid. Like, okay, cool. So we'll move on. If you want to know more, you can Google these videos. Heck yeah, it's a fascinating tool. So, but before this slide, SHRDLU it's pretty good at what it's doing. It's capturing a very natural way of interacting with language in its microworld explicitly only, right? You can't ask it how the weather is. It doesn't know what weather is. There's no such thing as weather in the blocks world. So this is cool. And also one final powerful tidbit of SHRDLU is it makes it fairly clear how to resolve ambiguities. So like you did before with the squirrel with the binoculars, put the blue pyramid on the block in the box. There's two ways to parse this. Put the blue pyramid on the block in the box. Okay, that's one option. Put the blue pyramid on the block in the box. Another option. What happens here? Why is this an ambiguous situation? Because it can be either of these. There's nothing in the structure, the syntax of this situation, of the received language that can tell us the secret answer, right? So the syntax system is flummoxed and can't give the semantic system a good parse to try to make sense of what action should be taken here. Now, semantics has some options. First, it can turn to blocks, the blocks subroutine, to ask if both of those situations are even there. Are they present, right? If one of them does not exist and the other one does, hey, we just solved it. Just by asking a separate system than syntax, we can immediately go and say, hey, check with the world. What actually exists here? Just like you may have done. Now, you didn't do this by checking to see if there were squirrels with binoculars outside your window, but you did check with your sort of knowledge base that I don't think squirrels can hold binoculars, right? So immediately, whatever simulation you were doing about figuring out what the heck this sentence is about for Bart, you threw it out. You said, no, that doesn't make any sense. That one doesn't fit. I will go with the version of this sentence that makes even the barest amount of sense. So semantics can turn to blocks in the real world to check on, hey, is one of these even possible? And then further, you could imagine, I'm not sure SHRDLU actually does this in its routines, but we can add on to it imaginatively in this world. If both of those situations are possible, semantics could just go to answer and say, yo, go ask the user, like, which one did you mean? That wasn't sufficient enough. A way of resolving ambiguity that is perfectly natural with the way the system is sort of interconnected, because syntax was allowed to fail, right? It was allowed to not be able to make sense of something, so it would rely on other systems to see what's up. So that's great, right? So this is an example of how SHRDLU's structure of being a sort of multiply connected set of various subroutines is able to help with things that normally would cause a lot of grief when you're thinking about things purely from a one-dimensional sort of language parse angle. So SHRDLU had some good successes here, I think. It's more or less a complete model of language in a very small world, the blocks world, micro world. It's fairly elegantly details the confounding problems in language. Deals with them. Like ambiguities, right? It's a fairly simple way. It has a fairly straightforward way of dealing with ambiguities, much like you might do, if you were calling the bursar and then you need to talk to registrar and you need to talk to, you bounce around a little bit. You see who's got the answers, right? So it also shows how this fairly parallel set of processes, so no primary central process handling everything, right, can help connect and capture a fairly complex phenomenon like language. Very brainy, very distributed cognition. And it gives this key to our aims here, this algorithmic account of language as a whole. Now, whole here, again, being a limited set, but it's still showing fairly natural behavior in a language capacity. Now, SHRDLU is not a full mind. It can't improvise, and it can't make up new things on the spot, and it can't be a creative, clever fool just like us, but it's able to do one version of a small world language, and that's pretty cool. Now, for our purposes, we're also going to take a minute and break apart that process that we watched a minute ago. Not watched, the example a moment ago. So hang on. For the record, we won't be attempting to recreate a system as complex as SHRDLU. It's not the worst thing to program. I've seen some examples before, but it's just a little bit too finicky. A lot of the issues we'd be solving would be very in the weeds details of how systems talk to each other and stuff. A little bit too below the level of the target level of programming skills in the class. So, and by below I mean more complex and in the weeds. Levels of analysis, high, low, right? So, but as an exercise together here, just in this lecture, let's consider what kinds of programming processes might be required for SHRDLU to function, to do this one. Find the block which is taller than the one you were holding and put it in the box. Okay, what do we think different systems might be firing to make this happen? Well, first we got to think about sort of what is the first thing that needs to happen before anything can be done in this situation. So the input system is getting this text, find a block which is taller than the one you are holding and put it in the box. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through, I don't know the exact process here, but I'm going to walk you through a sort of a toy version of how SHRDLU is going to do this, right? First, we could imagine that the input system is going to need to talk to the dictionary to figure out which things are which, right? So what do some of these things even refer to? So things like, oh, find and put are actions, block and box are objects, holding is a property, taller is a comparison between two properties, okay? So we're looking up what these different things are, and in so doing, we're also helping the grammar system start to piece together, okay, where do these fit in a sentence, in a parse, right? If I'm going to make a grammatical structure of trying to figure out what this sentence is getting at, then I'm going to need to know which things are actions, which things are blocks, etc., right? And semantics can also help come in and start to figure out what is the overall request here. Now, this is just for our benefit, just summarizing this medium step, but we've parsed it down to something like, okay, we're going to need to get an object, and there's a set of criteria that object have, and we're going to move it, right? So that may interact with the planner that then the mover will also interact with. So, okay, that step is solved, the most basic parsing. Now we're going to need to fill in some gaps, right? So we have various things in this sentence, right? We have a block. There's no specific block identified, but it has a set of properties that we can use, so which is taller. We have this idea, the one you are holding. What does the one mean? We have to figure that out as well, because the one is not anything, right? That is referring to something that we're going to have to retrieve from elsewhere in the world. And then put it in the box. Oy. So now we have it. What does it refer to? And again, a non-determinate, the box, right? So semantics has some work to do, right? It has a pretty good parse of the sentence, we'll say. I don't think there's any like syntactic ambiguity here. It all kind of makes sense, right? Find a block, all these things. So, but it still needs to fill in some of the gaps and figure out which objects are involved here and what's trying to be done. So what does one mean? Probably the first type of object that was referenced, or maybe specifically here because we have the one being some undetermined type of object, whichever one I am currently holding. That's pretty useful. The world tells me that, and that's also, I'm only holding one thing at a time as SHRDLU. So, hey, that's a pretty good key. That will help me fill in that one means whatever I'm holding. Okay, so which block is taller? So now this is an effortful search. We had to compare the height property of the block I am holding with all the other blocks and identify which one is larger than the one I'm holding. That's a loop you may be familiar with by now. That would be a loop of comparisons of if statements saying, okay, is this one larger? Then that's the one I want to keep track of. Is this one larger? And that's the one I want to keep track of, etc. What does it refer to? In this case, likely the first referent mentioned, so the first object mentioned. So find a block, something, 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 put it in the box, right? I think we get this one a little bit for free from if we did a syntactic parse, because there's this sort of interstitial phrase in the middle here. What is the box? Well, thankfully, there's only one box on the scene, so we don't need a determiner. We will find it immediately and say, okay, I need to figure out what object this is referring to. Oh, it's the box, the only box. Okay. So the outcome now is a fairly clear plan to move the tall blue block, which we determined. I should show a visual of that. We'll get back to it, into the only box. Okay. That makes sense. We have used different systems to pick apart what exactly is meant by this sentence. So now we're going to plan our actions. Again, same input. The planner and blocks systems are now going to likely need to give mover something useful to do, right? So the very first thing is check, is this thing that's been asked of me even possible? Am I going to be breaking any rules of physics here? There's no pyramids on top of boxes. I'm not lifting things through each other. Like, what are the constraints of this basic action I've been instructed to do? Now, I don't have to stop there if I do end up with an error. For example, hey, I'm holding a block and they want me to move a different block. I can't do that. I can't hold two things at once. That's where you can come up with some interim steps using the planner system. So now we recognize that we need to put down the block we're holding before we can do anything else with our little virtual arm. Okay. So that gives us a decent outcome that is sort of a step-by-step process. It's kind of foolproof at this point. We've checked what all the possibilities are. We're going to put down the block we're holding. We're going to pick up the tall blue block. We're going to put the tall blue block in the box and say, okay, done, right? Or I think it's just okay when it has done a simple command like this. So to quickly refer to it again, we have come up with the plan to put our block down, find the tall block, which we identified in an earlier step, and then drop it into a space that it will fit, right? So, what kinds of low-level kind of programming things would you have to do to get this stuff done? In one sense, it's actually pretty simple. Now, there's more things going on here that we will not have covered, but I just want to highlight the things that you ought to already be familiar with at this point from the course discussions and the programming lectures and assignments. A lot of what's going on is similar, right? We're still splitting up text into tokens, which we will use to help figure out some meaning and some syntax as well from our dictionary, right? A dictionary holds a bunch of information. That is a structure that we have available to the system. And comparing conditions, that's pretty useful. So, for example, selecting the tallest block. That means we're going to loop and compare all the blocks one by one until you found the tallest block. Or I guess taller was the specific instruction. Okay, cool. How about planning whether a move would fail? So, would any of the blocks supported property become no from an action I propose to take in the planner? And then what steps can we search for to try to avoid it? All these are, pretty basic stuff that we've talked about already, looping and comparisons and things like that. Now, you need to have a clever structure that represents the world and a clever structure that represents your knowledge, but these are the kinds of things most models of language will be able to interface with, right? There's some kind of structure that represents knowledge, both of the world and of something learned or internalized or whatever. And then there's also just how we chop up the language. So we're seeing that SHRDLU is, despite its sophisticated nature and its lovely interconnected properties and all the cool things it's able to do, it's mostly just doing what any other natural language model might do. So tokenizing things into meaningful units, looking for some structure and meaning using knowledge that it's able to refer to, so the dictionary, state of the world, and then produce some kind of output in the form of text or actions from whatever that processing is. So that's it. That's the goal today. That was, I hope we've satisfied in your mind that SHRDLU is a neat little thing from years ago. It's a powerful language model, but only for a very, very, very small section of language. And it's also, I hope it seems to you, at least at this point in the course, it's not completely out of reach. You kind of can start to see some of the bones, right? You could see how some of the text might flow between different subsystems. We may dig into that in the future, but maybe not. But either way, I hope you now have a fondness for SHRDLU about, what the heck is this weird little pyramid world about. So, as always, a final thought. SHRDLU achieved a lot of great things, analyzing language processing in a fairly complete way using a distributed set of processing tools in a microworld. But recall that the world of language processing is huge, complex, and oftentimes messy. What are some limitations SHRDLU systems might have when trying to scale up to real-world situations? Which specific subsystems might be harder or easier to scale up than the others? All right, that's it. Thanks. Take care.